Hi, Eitan and Lior. This is your video for the last day or so of Talmud class. So here we are. We are looking at the Mishnah of rescuing food when a fire breaks out on Shabbat. And so the idea that we need to establish, first of all, is that no one's in danger in this fire, right? We know that the idea of pikuach nefesh, or saving a life, and the way that works is that all laws of Shabbat can be violated for the sake of saving a life. So we have to assume that we're not talking about an issue of that. We're talking about there's a fire in your house, and and they're basically saying, how much food can you rescue? So what's the problem here? The problem is that the rabbis are afraid that you that if that they know that one of the big prohibitions of Shabbat is not just lighting fire, but actually putting out fire is also one of the 39 prohibitions of Shabbat. So if they know that, they're basically asking the question, trying to balance, what can we allow you to do in that house that's on fire? And this is not about like whether we're like if we're damaging your health or anything like that, because then you would just say don't go into that fire. There must be, you can reasonably get stuff out of that fire, but how much can you rescue from that fire? And I think the big problem is, if you are allowed to rescue everything, you may go ahead and put out that fire, or you may be tempted to put out that fire. So the rabbis are balancing that they're putting a temptation in front of you. This is all my stuff that's being burned up. If I have a possibility of going inside, not only am I going to go inside, but I'm going to try to manipulate that fire in some way and even put it out. And then I violated Shabbat. So they're asking, what can you actually save? And so what you can actually save is, you can save meals for Shabbat. And this Mishnah basically goes through the idea of how much food can you save for Shabbat. And Rav Yossi makes it very clear that no matter what, at any moment, there is a certain amount of food that you can save for Shabbat. And what is that? That's question one. And then the question is, why is that Rabbi Yossi's opinion? Well, Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that there are three meals that we are obligated to eat on Shabbat. One is on Friday night, one is on Saturday at noon, like after you pray, and one is Saturday afternoon, like towards 3 or 4 o'clock, which we called Sudash Lishit, the third meal, or Shalashidas, or something like that. And so Rabbi Yossi makes it clear that no matter what, any time of the day, any time of that 25 hours of Shabbat, fire breaks out, you can always save enough for three meals. But the rabbis are actually saying something else. So that this question number two is, what actually are the rabbis, the kind of the Mishnah that comes before Rabbi Yossi is right at the end, but the rabbis are saying something else. They're also saying, technically, there are also 3 meals of on Shabbat, but they're asking another question, that actually maybe you can't save for all three of those meals at once, but what can you save? And it depends on certain times of Shabbat what you can save. And what's the kind of the larger principle? This is question number three. What's the larger principle that kind of they're saying as far as what they're allowing to be saved and what not? Okay, that's question number three. Okay, so let's move on. So we're going to go to oh, and um, I brought up this idea in class, that actually there's Mishnahs. There's Mishnah. We've looked at a lot of Mishnah this year, which we've made mauve for mauve. Is that right? The color mauve for Mishnah. And I wanted to, before we started this unit, because you're going to ask, as we're going through this unit, you're going to ask a couple questions. And one of the questions you're going to ask is, why did Rabbi Light pick these Mishnahs? Like this isn't teaching me anything really about how I can become a better person. This isn't really teaching me anything like that is going to theologically change or rock my world in some way. So what is this all about? And so I wanted to bring in this small little statement. So there's something called Pirkei Avot, sayings of our fathers. That's in the Mishnah book. There are 6 books of the Mishnah. Nizikim, damages, are one of them. These are all of the Masechets, and one of those Masechets is Masechet Avot, or Pirkei Avot. And I wanted to kind of point out, some of these. These are things that you would normally find in a fortune cookie, right? Like nice sayings, like Hillel says, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, who am I? If not now, when?" You may have heard that before. Very famous. Hillel also says, don't remove yourself from community, or don't say, "I'll study when I have time. Perhaps you'll never have time." And I do this because I wanted to bring up this statement from Yeshua ben Parachia, who says, "Make yourself a rabbi, buy yourself a friend." Or acquire for yourself a friend. And that's a great statement in its own right. But really, the one I wanted to look at, this one, is Heve dan ekol hadam lakaf zakut. So judge every person towards kind of worthiness or righteousness. And really, this statement is give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's why this Talmud piece is really interesting, because you're going to see on kind of a slightly strange comment that you're going to say that just can't be true. And yet the rabbis are going to try again and again and again to show that it could be true. And so it's interesting. It's like they're basically saying, if this rabbi thought it might be true, our job, if this rabbi who was a Tana, who was writing in the time of the Mishnah, thought this might be true, then it's our job in the Talmud to try to figure it out, why he might be true or not. Now, of course, they could have just said, "Oh, it's not. This guy's not right. His name's Reb Chitka. Reb Chitka, he's just totally off, and I can prove it very easily." But no, they actually try really hard, and they go through this intellectual exercise of trying to show that Reb Chitka could be right. So my question to you is why, right? And I kept on asking this in class as well, and that's question number 4 for you. Why do they do that? Why are they do they say why are they kind of going through all of this effort to basically this intellectual exercise to see if Rab Chipka could be correct? That's my question, even though I know you don't know how it's working yet, but that's kind of going to help us out. Okay, so here we're back to the Mishnah, and the Mishnah starts with the following question: Tnu Rabbanan. It says in a Braita, our rabbis taught in a Braita, Kama su'udot chayav adam lachol b'Shabbat. How many meals is a person obligated to eat on Shabbat? Now, let me just ask you a question. Just from the Mishnah, which is above, this is question number 5. Just from the Mishnah, how many meals do you think someone is obligated to eat on Shabbat? So give me the number in question number 5. And question number 6, which is a little harder, is explain to me why you think that way, why you think the Mishnah actually proves that. That's question number 6. Okay. So now we're going to get the answers. And I hope your answer to the last question was 3, because the Mishnah seems to prove that. But here we have Rab Chitka saying something else. He's saying 4. He's saying actually there are 4 meals that someone is obligated to eat on Shabbat. The strange thing is we didn't, in this set of Mishnah, we haven't seen the number 4 at all. And yet Rab Chitka is making that claim. And so what you're going to see in the Gemara, in the Talmud, the Gemara, where I use those terms interchangeably, what you're going to see is the attempt of the Amoraim, people who speak in the Gemara, to try to show you that not only the rabbis could not only 3 could be right, but 4 could also be right. And that's going to be the job of this. Again, you might say at the end, who cares? But I don't know, maybe there is something to care about. So we'll see. We'll ask that question at the end. So here we go. So again, here are the meals that typically in our life today, like we actually know that actually there are not, it's not 4 meals we're obligated for, but 3. Shabbat dinner. There's you wake up and you pray, and there's an each Shabbat lunch. Then there's a third meal kind of later on in the day, in the afternoon. And I think Kate might have said in class, like, how come you're not eating breakfast? Like maybe that should be a meal, and maybe that's where Reb Chitka is coming from, or maybe Reb Chitka is just coming from, hey, it's Shabbos. You should have as many meals as you possibly can to increase the joy of Shabbat, and if food does it, then let's have more meals rather than less. Of course, when you start obligating people to have 4 meals on Shabbat, that could be a tremendous imposition because meals cost money, right? And we're going to see later on, it was typical actually that people ate 2 meals a day, not three, and certainly not four. So adding another meal is really hard. Okay, so let's go on. So Rabbi Yochanan says, oh, and both of them, meaning both the anonymous Mishnah or the person who says three, and we're going to call those the rabbis, and Rab Chidka, an individual rabbi, Rab Chidka, both of them are getting their answer from a pasuk in the Torah, and that pasuk is about the manna that falls. And look at what it says. And Moshe said, "Eat it today, because today is a Shabbat for God. Today you will not find any bread in the field." Now, how could it be? What is? Let's start with the rabbis. What is the word? What are they looking at here in this verse? They're saying, from this verse, I can learn that there are actually 3 meals for Shabbat. All right. So what's the word they're learning that from? That's question number 7. And you should be able to. And here it is. It's that repetition 3 times of the word Hayom. Right. Now, here's the problem. Chitka, we just said before, Rabbi Yochanan said, Shnehem, both of them, both Rab Chitka and the other people, we'll call the rabbis, they learned that their answers from this one verse. So it's pretty easy to see how the rabbis, or what we're going to call the Tanakama, or what we're going to call the anonymous Mishnah, where it's pretty easy how they got that idea. But how does Rav Chitka get the idea of 4 when we're just seeing 3 Hayoms? So we had some interesting answers in class, but for question number 8, what would be your answer? I'm just writing down. And here's what Rav Chitka says, right? He says, Hane tlata hayom levar meorta. These 3 hayoms are excluding the night meal, meaning that there's a night meal that takes place that's not having to do with the hayom. So hayom is meal 1, or meal. So night meal is meal 1, then hayom is meal 2, hayom is meal 3, hayom is meal 1, hayom is meal. No, sorry. Night meal is meal 1. Friday night dinner is meal 1. This hayom is meal 2. Hayom is meal 3. Hayom is meal 4. By the way, Reb Chitka has an interesting point here, because what does the word yom mean? It means day, right? So maybe saying those are talking about meals that happen mamash during the day. But there's another meal that happens, and that's at night. So actually, that should equal 4 meals. So actually, I think he has a point there. Okay. So, and now they're going to ask the question, doesn't the Mishnah itself seem to prove that Reb Chitka is wrong? And look, right here, it says, there was a fire in your house. If the fire ignited on Friday night, you can rescue food for 3 meals, right? That seems to say that there are 3 meals on Shabbat. Now, Rab Chitka is going to look at this same piece of Mishnah that seems to be talking about 3 and says, no, I can learn from that there are 4 meals on Shabbat. So how does he do it? That's question number 9. And here's how he does it. He has this interesting phrase, which I thought was really hard to understand. My lav de lo achal, lo de achal. Is it not that he didn't eat, that he did not yet eat? No, he already ate. So what is this actually saying? See if you, for question number 10, can you figure out actually what that's saying? Is it not that he already ate? No, he ate. Right? So remember, this is a statement that's trying to show us that there are 4 meals. So what are they saying? So what's our assumption? Our assumption here is it's Friday night. You have not yet had your meal, and a fire breaks out. You're scrambling around and you're like, okay, how many meals am I allowed to take? How many meals? Oh, I have 3 meals that I get to eat. So I'm going around now and kind of saving those 3 meals. But Rab Chitka says, I can also learn 4 meals from this because I think what happened is you already ate your meal, your Friday night meal. The fire breaks out, and now you're going away around and eat and saving for 3. So that means 4. Okay, that could conceivably work, right? So it's saying this kind of phrase is Ha'im lav delo echol. Is it not that he hasn't? Is it not that he hasn't eaten? No, it's not that he hasn't eaten. He actually has eaten, and we're saving 3, right? Okay. So now we go on. We're going on to the next part of our mission, and you're going to see this answer right here. My lav delo echol lo dechol comes up for all of these pieces because they're going to go through each of them. Fire ignited in the morning after Shabbat evening meal has been eaten and before the meal of Shabbat day, the new meal, you can only rescue 2 meals. And that seems to be supporting the idea that there are 3 meals of Shabbat, right? You've eaten one, you haven't eaten your second meal of the day, and a fire breaks out. So you have 2 meals you still need to eat. So you can save for 2. But what's Rav Chipka going to say again? He's going to say, no, 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 no. It's noon. You've already eaten your first meal at night, and you've eaten your second meal, and now all of a sudden the Mishnah is saying you can save 2 more. So that's 4. Okay, and now we move on again. Fire ignites in the afternoon. You can rescue 1 meal. So what's the Mishnah trying to say? I'm going to ask you this for 11. See if you can figure it out. And how does Rab Chitka say, no, I can learn 4 meals from this? That's question number 12. Okay, I'm not going to tell you. I think you can figure that out probably, but it's the same thing. Okay, then after all this is done, the Talmud is going to say, read the Sefer of the Mishnah. The Sefer tells us everything. The Sefer says Rabbi Yossi, the Reisha is the beginning of the Mishnah, Sefer is the end of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi says you can always rescue food for 3 meals. So Rabbi Yossi kind of says the statement, but he also believes that all we're talking about up here is 3 meals. So we learn from this that our Mishnah is not like Rab Chitka. Okay, we've tried and tried and tried to support Rab Chitka, but we haven't been able to. Okay, and now we move on. Now, once we've established that our Mishnah is not like Rab Chitka, but we do know that Rab Chitka has this belief of 4 meals on Shabbat, and that the rabbis or the anonymous Mishnah has a belief of 3 meals on Shabbat. And now we're just going to move to another Mishnah that's going to talk about 2 different something, and then we're going to ask who wrote this Mishnah. Okay, I'm not quite sure why we care about that, but we do care for some reason. The Talmud cares a lot about who is the author of Mishnahs that don't have names attached to it. They try over and over and over again, even though we haven't seen it much. This is a typical characteristic of the Talmud to try to find the author of a certain Mishnah, of a certain Braita. Okay, so here's the Mishnah. So first of all, the Mishnah is going to talk about 2 things. It's going to talk about that that if you are poor, there are certain ways that you can be sustained by your community. There are 2 ways. One is on a daily basis, you can be sustained by something called the tamchui, and that's kind of like the food pantry. You would go each day to the food pantry and you would pick up your food for the day, and that you would be. But if you, and that's probably if you were a short term, but if you were a long term poor person, if people knew you were poor, you would actually get something from the kupa. You would get a certain amount of money from the kupa each and every week, so you wouldn't have to keep on going to the food pantry every single day. You would get this lump sum of money, and as a poor person, you would get to spend that. Okay. So tamchui is probably like short-term help. Kupa is probably long-term help. Okay, a week long usually. Okay, so here's the Mishnah. The Mishnah says the following. The Mishnah says, "Mi sheyesh lo mazon shtei tzudot lo yitol min hatamchui." A person who is poor but actually has 2 meals per day, that person does not need to is not allowed to take tzedakah from this place. Okay? So my question number 13 is, who then is allowed to take tzedakah from that place? Someone who has less than 2 meals a day to them. But if they do have 2 meals a day, they're like, that's enough. You're good. And then the Mishnah goes on and says, someone who has 14 meals a week, they don't get to take from the kupa. They don't get to take their a weekly none. And actually, that makes sense, right? 2 meals a day, 7 times 2 is 14. So if you have 14 meals or more, you're not allowed to be sustained by tzedakah. If you have less, if you have 13 meals, enough for 13 meals, yes, you can. Okay. Now, so the Gemara is going to say, oh, this Mishnah, I don't know who wrote the Mishnah, but I can tell you for certain who didn't write this Mishnah. The rabbis of my who said there are 3 meals on Shabbat, and Rab Chitka who says there are 4 meals we eat on Shabbat. Why is that? Because if the Mishnah was like the rabbis, then it wouldn't have said 14 meals are the minimal amount that you can have and be able to sustain yourself. And it wouldn't. What would the rabbis have said? That's question number 14. And question number 15 is, if this Mishnah was like Rab Chitka, it would have said how many meals? Okay, so 14. So if the Mishnah was like the rabbis, it would have said 7 times 2, 2 times 6, right? But that one day a week, Shabbat, it shouldn't be just 2, but it should be 3, so 15. And if the Mishnah was like Rab Chitka, it would have said 16. I hope you see how that's the case. Okay. So now we're going to get. So this is what. So now we're going to do something really interesting. The Gemara is going to reject that idea that we said before. We just said, I can tell you that this Mishnah. I know 2 people who did not write this Mishnah. For some reason, the Gemara does not want to allow that. They actually want to say, no. I can read this Mishnah and still tell you that it might have been written by the rabbis. It might have been written by Rab Chitka. How is that? So let's give it a try. So the Mishnah is saying 14 meals are the minimum, okay? But the rabbis are saying, actually, the minimum amount of meals is 6 times 2, 2 times 6, plus 3, right? This is what the Mishnah seems to be saying, but the rabbis should be actually having another meal on Shabbat. You should have 3 meals on Shabbat, and I only see 2. I see 2 meals on Monday, 2 meals on Wednesday, 2 meals on Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I need that third meal. How do I get there? And so, right, I would need one more meal somewhere in here. How do we see it? And then, so this is how the Gemara is going to come back. The Gemara is going to come back and say the following. Okay, so this is a meal you eat in the morning. This is a meal you eat at night, right? So let's say this is a meal you eat at 7:30 when you wake up a.m. And this is a meal you're eating this is a meal you're eating at 10. This is a meal you're eating at 7 or 8 p.m. Then you go to bed. At 10, 7 a.m., 10, 7 a.m., 10, 7 a.m., 10, 7 a.m., 10, 7 a.m. So now all of a sudden you have your meal on Shabbat. You have your meal on Shabbat, and this is after Shabbat. So what are the rabbis? What is the Gemara going to say? It's going to say this Mishnah totally could have been written by the rabbis, because how? This meal right here, we can kind of move that down from 10 o'clock to 5 o'clock while Shabbat's still happening. And then we have all of a sudden 14 meals total, but 3 meals on Shabbat, right? So they're saying Shabbat, the meal, this is a Shabbat meal, this becomes a Shabbat meal, and this becomes a Shabbat meal. Okay, but now we're going to get a little bit, there it is, 1, 2, 3. But now, interestingly enough, they're going to say, I can actually find 4 meals for Shabbat. And so my question number 18, and show you that Rav Chitka could also be the writer of this Mishnah. So that's question number 16. What are those 4 meals? This is a hard one, but here's what they're saying. Sorry about that. Saying, oh, we can find it right there. We can take that meal that you were eating at 10 o'clock. We can move it all the way up till 7 o'clock. And we could have this other meal at like a few hours later. So we could have 2 meals on Friday, 2 meals on Saturday, using the same system that the rabbis are using, pushing that one up. And all of a sudden, we've got our 4 meals. And that's exactly what Rab Chitka is saying. Meal 1, meal 2, meal 3, meal 4, right? This is earlier in the day, not so late. And that equals 16, right? That could work. But then the Gemara is actually going to say, wait a second, that's not so fair. That means what time are we eating on Friday for the first time? That's question number 17. And they're going to say, but that means that you're fasting all day. How can you fast all day? Right? And that's exactly what they say. And they say, okay, then they say Ella. Do we remember what the word Ella means? That's question number 18. Okay, Ella means reject all those ideas. Reject the idea that this Mishnah could have been written by the rabbis. Reject the idea this could have been written by Rab Chitka. But Ha-Mane, this is the person who actually wrote this Mishnah. This Mishnah was written by Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva said, make your Shabbats into weekdays so you don't have to rely on others. Rabbi Akiva says, when times are tough, make your Shabbat exactly like the weekdays. And let's just look back what a weekday looks like for someone who is poor. Has what? Has what? Oh, here it is. Has what? And so according to Rabbi Akiva, how many meals is he having on Shabbat? That's question number 19. And which meals actually are they? Okay. And I think basically Rabbi Akiva would say, this meal is a Shabbat meal, Friday night, and this meal is a Shabbat meal, but I'm going to keep this one at its later time. And then we've actually gotten there. So one other piece, and Lior, you actually don't have to do this because you were in class today. So you can kind of with 20, you can kind of sign off and you're done. But Eitan, since you weren't in class today, I'm just going to add this one piece, which I find so fascinating, that actually the rabbis say, um, for some reason, even though we've shown 2 cases where Rab Chitka is not correct, they're almost not willing to give up on Rab Chitka being a player in these discussions. And just look at this right here. A poor person, a Braita, a poor person who travels from place to place, we give him certain things to sustain himself. If it's Shabbat, we give that person food for how many meals? So according to what you know right now, how many meals is that? That's question number 21. And that's 3 meals. Oh, 3 meals. And then we're saying, oh, this is probably written by the Rabbanan, the rabbis who wrote that other Mishnah about there being 3 meals. And it's probably not written by Rab Chitka. But now, of course, they're going to come back and say, Olam Rabbi Chitka. It actually, everyone knows, or it's always actually could be according to Rabbi Chitka. And here's how. So I think this is my last question of the day, 22. How is it? And here's what Rab Chitka says. It should be here. Rab Chitka says, he's carrying a meal with him, meaning, yeah, he gets 3 meals, but he's got another meal in his back pocket, and he's carrying it with him. And we should know that a poor person always has 1 meal to spare with him, and so he's eating that, and he gets his 3 meals equals 4 meals. And so I just wanted you to kind of see again back to the Pirkei Avot piece. Here we have the Gemara trying again and again not to give up on Rab Chitka, not to sideline him, but to always consider the perspective that maybe actually Rab Chitka is correct. And they have this mental exercise going on of why it is or how it is that Rab Chitka could be correct. So email me those answers and I'll get you credit for the days that were missed. Thank you.